Good morning, everyone. I would like to start this morning with the Accommodation Steering Committee meeting for November the 14th. Is there any declarations of conflict of interest from any board members on this? Not seeing any. We have the minutes. We have no minutes from the previous meeting because that would have been dealt with. We're up to item number 1, which is a project update on our one district construction project in St. Catharines. And we have a report from Miesloff this morning. Chief, I'll turn it over to you or whoever you want to designate, because I see Miesloff's not here, and that was part of the agreement. They would just provide a written report to us whenever this committee meet. I have not been at the site now in probably 3 weeks. I'm hoping to get out there tomorrow or Monday. But it is before us. If there's any additional information yourself or James Berg would like to add to this, or Deputy Forty, we're open to that.
Thank you very much. Through Mr. Chair, what I can say from the report is you'll note is that the project is currently 5 weeks behind schedule, and that's primarily due to delays with regards to the fabrication and delivery of structural steel. If you've been by the site recently, you'll notice that the steel is being erected, and I know that Merit Contractors are looking to increase their work week to include Saturdays to try and gain back some of the 5 weeks that has been lost. They're working very hard to try and achieve the building being closed in by February, I think it's February 11th of 2020, which will allow them to be able to do all of the work inside unobstructed from the weather. So the project is tracking on budget at the $20,015,833. They continue very closely to monitor the vibrations on the site in the area near the British Methodist Episcopal Church, Salem Chapel, which, as you know, is a designated National Historic Site. So that's always been very something that the region has ensured was a big part of this construction plan, and they routinely monitor for vibrations. At present, we're still anticipating occupancy based on the timeline of fall of 2019. And I don't know if James Berg has any additional comments. So, no. So those are my remarks at this point in time.
Okay, I will note that on page 4, did they do say fall of 2019? It should be 2020. I saw that last night.
Yes, that's correct. Fall of 2020.
Would have been nice to have moved in 2 months ago. On that, any questions from board members on the site? It's, as I said, I haven't been out. I've driven by it in the last week, but I haven't been out physically on it for just a little over 2 weeks. So I did see the steel getting put up, which is good to see. And I understand some of the pressures they have trying to get the concrete poured on all the different layers to try to get this place closed in so they can at least gain some construction time during February, March, when we'll probably be into even more severe winter weather. Does James have any comments back there? No. Okay. Board members? Nothing? Oh, Member D'Angelo?
Mr. Chair, I'll move the report, and then my secondary question is, will there be opportunities to tour the facility at different stages? I know when this building was built, the board had several opportunities to visit it while it was being built. Is that something that's going to be looked at? I know obviously right now there's nothing really to look at. You drive by and you see it all, but as it progresses.
I would say I would certainly welcome that, and we did that here. I don't think it's an issue for them to supply hard hats and that sort of thing. We used to do them here quite often on Fridays because a lot of the trades have a tendency to they work a 10-hour day. This may not be the case because they're trying to get caught up here, but Friday afternoons used to be the time when this building had the least amount of construction workers on site, and the general risk to visitors was a bit minimized. But I will, through the chief's office, make arrangements for one. I would suspect it would probably be a good idea to do one in early February, just as they're getting ready to sort of close it in. Right now, it's exactly what you see. It's a gravel base inside with a bunch of conduits sticking up, which eventually will have this poured concrete foundation, which is what they're trying to get done before that base freezes, which is quite critical. I need a Member D'Angelo moved it, seconded by Member Eek, to receive the report. Show of hands in favor. Thank you. Any other new business dealing with accommodations? Chief, anything on your side?
No, that's all I have, Mr.
Okay.
Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. We have a confidential report coming up in a minute. Our next meeting will be on Thursday, the 9th of January, and I will then move for someone to move on adjournment. Vice Chair Steele. So we've adjourned from the public component of the accommodations committee. We're now going to move into confidential. So I would ask for confirmation from our video folks that they have shut down the feed.
Good morning, everyone. At this point in time, we're going to be starting the Finance Committee meeting. First item on the agenda is to see if there's any conflicts of, that the members wish to declare at this point in time. Seeing no hands, there's no conflicts, we'll move forward. First item under new business is the region's response to the budget planning, Niagara Regional Police Service 2020 operating budget report. It is an information report to be received. If I could have a mover to put it on the floor for discussion. Moved by Member Gibson, second by Member Gale. Any discussion on the report? Seeing none, all those in favor? Those opposed? It's carried. That moves us to item 2, which is Niagara Regional Police Service financial variance overview for the year ending quarter September 30th, 2019. If I could, it's an information report. If I could have a member to put it on the floor, Member Eek, seconded by Vice Chair Steele. Any discussions regarding the report? Member Gill.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair, and through you to the Chief or whoever. I'm just confused here. You have a surplus of $304,000 in the personnel costs, which is good. Correct me, stop me if I'm saying anything wrong here. Later on, the favorable trend resulting in a savings of $323,553. And then, I'm trying to go back on my notes here. At the year end, the grant funding deficit will offset, and we'll have a shortfall of $128,568. I'm just making sure all the figures are right, because I put all these figures in my mind when I was reading this, and I thought we'd end up with a surplus at the end of the year.
So through you, Mr. Chair, so if you take the cumulative amounts that you've mentioned there, so first of all, the personnel costs plus the other expenditures, add those two together, and then subtract the projected shortfall of $128,568, provides you the anticipated surplus of $499,197, which is on page 1.
Okay, and as long as I'm sure the numbers are right, my question to you is, how do we get such a surplus? Good going, but is that because of, you can take credit for this if you want, your great planning and great overtime management and all this bit, or how do we get that?
As outlined in the report, primarily those savings come from personnel costs, where we've had people retire, and then it's the gap in time from when they retire to the time that we're able to rehire somebody to replace them. And in some cases, it's the differential in pay, because again, seniority, they're at the highest level of their wage earnings, as opposed to hiring somebody that's at the lower or the lowest wage earnings.
I never thought of that one. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions on the report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor to receive? Those opposed? It's carried. That moves us to item number 3, Niagara Regional Police Service audit engagement to prepare and audit the service's financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2019. As you can see, there's a recommendation with, well, there's 2 options, so the committee will have a couple. Is this right? Yeah, there's a couple recommendations that are there, so this is up for committee discussion. If there's a committee member that would propose one of the recommendations or would like to hear further from the chief and staff, Member Gansel, Chair Gansel.
Thank you, and for you, Chair. In looking at these options and having gone through these discussions over the years, the simplification, or option number 1, would be the one that I would recommend. We as an organization, when I use the term organization, the police service and the board, we're downstream, I refer to it, of the region. The region does all our check writing, they do all our tendering, they do all our financial operations. As much as we have budgets and we have staff here that are tasked through the chief and the deputies to maintain what I call good financial responsibility, the region is the one that is actually the keeper of the accounts and the major component here. I don't believe it is in from a cost of these audits, and they can be extremely detailed and obviously related to cost of having them done. I don't believe we as an organization need the detailed full financial statement option, which is number 2. So my recommendation would be option number 1.
Okay, is there a seconder for option number 1? Yeah, Vice Chair Steele. Okay, so that's the option that's on the floor, so we'll have discussion on that. Member Eek?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My question would be as indicated by Chair Ganzel, our association with the region and our finances going there for maintenance. Is there not an opportunity from a savings to employ the same auditor from the region as we could use as well? Or is that automatic at this point?
No, we use the same auditor as the region does, but there's 2 options available for us. One is what's called a simplified method, where it's just basically auditing your financial statement, your source of revenue and expenditures, and then a full audit would also do the balance sheet. So it's a little bit more intensive, but the auditor does both. The auditor does both the region and the service here, because there's an amalgamated statement that comes together.
So then a supplementary question would be then what does the region follow with respect to their audit procedure? Do they have they chosen one of the 2 options that is now being made available to our service board?
The region would follow, the chief could fill in this, but the region would follow the full disclosure financial statements, because they're obliged under the Municipalities Act. So their regulations are a little different. We have the option from a police service board of either doing a simplified method or a full audit, while they have no choice, but they have to do a full audit. Oh, yeah.
So we are actually audited as part of the region. So the audit of the region includes us. It's a full audit that includes us. They actually come here and do work here at our service and as part of the full audit of the region, because we're consolidated under them for municipal reporting. This is a separate audit that the board over the years has made changes over the years and gone back and forth, because they just thought that they need more audit, and that was fine. So that's why you have these options. Neither one of these is actually required, because we're audited as part of the region, but the option is done in order to give you a better comfort level with our finances.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I'm beginning to sound to me that this is redundant. That why are we, unless we felt there was some wrongdoing or were the audit by Deloitte Douche at the region, it sounds like we're looking for a second audit here.
Maybe if I could have, through the chief, just a response to that. The member's asking, is this just a redundancy of doing this, or is there benefits or advantages of doing either the simplified method or the more full-blown method?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll have our finance manager, Laura Rulo, address that.
Okay, so through to the chair, in the report, you would have read that we canvassed other police services, and none of the other services do either the simplified or consolidated. They just let their municipality or their city do the audit, because they're required under the Municipal Act to provide full financial statements. We've traditionally here done the simplified method, which provides you with a bit of assurance that we are, the finance department is complying to all of our financial accounting practices. The only thing you need to understand is that at a consolidated level, there is a materiality threshold that is very high. So often at the consolidated region level, they may not necessarily look at any of our particular financial information or numbers, because we're just small in comparison. So I think historically the simplified method has been preferred by the board as just a way of assuring that we're doing our due diligence as a finance department. But just to repeat, neither of those 2 options are required under the Police Service Act or the Municipal Act for a police service.
Rick, as a follow-up?
Yes, a follow-up would be that given your comment that we're a small apportionment of a very large budget, that is it because then that the police budget perhaps we get a response back and it itemizes so that we can be assured that we've been covered appropriately and that, as I say, it's more of a look and see, I think, and I come back to the redundancy question, but I'd be pleased to hear your comments.
Okay, so through to the chair. Yeah, what Deloitte would do is they actually don't follow the public sector accounting guidelines. They look at more the budget versus the actual, and our actual this year versus last year actual. So they actually look at our major variances. It's not unlike what you see when we report our quarterly variance report to you. So they're just doing an assurance testing, and they will look, when they look at our financials, they look at a lower threshold. So there is a little bit of assurance on your behalf that they're looking at our major variances, why we are, different from budget, and our expenses versus last year. So they do some testing at a much lower threshold than they would at a consolidated level.
Member Gibson?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. How long has this additional audit been done? Have we done it how many years? Approximately, like.
So prior to 2004, there was no additional budget done, audit done. And then around 2004, they started doing the more simplified version where we just compared to, based on our financial statements. And then about 4 years ago, the board chose to have a full audit done, and we created a balance sheet. So we actually don't have our own balance sheet. It's a separate balance sheet that we actually have to create for these purposes. So that's why the simplified method is easier, because we don't have to do the extra work to create an actual independent balance sheet. We don't have our own balance sheet, but it's gone back and forth since about 2004. Prior to that, we've never had a separate audit. We were part of their audit.
Okay, thank you, and carry on. In that time, have we found gaps? Has the additional audit revealed things that the regional audit has not?
So over the years, we've had, so they give us a management letter at the end, which to me is always, and the committee chair can attest to this, the management letter is usually the most important, where they define gaps. Over the years, they found a couple recommendations for us, little recommendations. It could be timing of a revenue at the end of the year, or timing at the beginning of the year, just revenue or expenditure timings. But for the last few years, there's been no management points at all. For about the last 3 or 4 years, there's been no management points at all, I don't think. Laura says ever since she started.
So from my perspective, I look at that, and it seems, along with Member Eek, complete redundancy to have it done a second time when we're not identifying any major gaps. It's not being looked at from a different perspective. To me, it seems to be definitely money. Go ahead.
To give you a little comfort, and again, I don't have a preference either way, because we can do all of them, but we are a significant portion of our budget is salaries, and we are part of the region's, a significant portion of the region's salaries and benefits, and they do come here and do testing on our salary and benefits, and we do end up a big part of the salary and benefits. It's the other expenditures that we might not get picked up in, because we're such a small part of the other expenditures, so they may not pick up those little pieces, but salaries and benefits, which is the biggest portion, we are included in that budget, and we do get picked up in there.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Just for the board's information, I don't know if you have it handy. When you're talking materiality, what is the region's threshold for materiality, and what is the threshold that we have here? Because I'm trying to take back myself.
So through to the chair, we often ask the question of Deloitte, what is the materiality threshold? And I've never been given the response. I know it's quite high. I think it's a percentage of the total revenue, but.
Yeah, I know in the region, I think it's over like $1 million, if I'm not mistaken. So they really, like I said, I don't have that information. I know through the audit committee, they do give that at the region, but I thought it might be helpful here to understand what's being looked at through the audit process, and the audit process is looking at how the processes work. So if there's any efficiencies, any ways of doing things differently, that comes through a management letter later. So it's not necessarily you're paying for the numbers, but you're looking at giving someone else the opportunity to look at how you're doing things, and is there any way of improving it. So, and sometimes things get improved without going through a management letter when they discuss the items, reviewing them with the staff at the different levels. So just wanted to throw that out, but there is a cost associated with that, and it's the board's determination if that has the value for it. So just, Vice Chair Steele?
Okay, so we don't have to do this, which is good. There's a full audit being done by the same accountant firm for the region, which we're included with, who really holds everything that we have anyways. Can we just not ask the region to have Deloitte, even if we put it in our budget, you know, they charged $1,000 to come to a meeting and just go through our small portion of the regional's budget, for us, I mean, if we really want that. But again, we're spending money that, to me, doesn't need to be spent. You know, if they're doing a full audit and something's going on here, then I think they'd be finding it by now. It's not like they're going over the numbers twice. So I just, you know, and if there's been no issues in the last, well, since 2004, whether they've done the smaller audit or a full audit, I mean, a full audit's already being done on us. So I just can't come to grips, you know, one's 4,500 and the other's 12 to some odd thousand on this thing. But now that I hear this, I'd rather just invite them down to speak to us if we want it. I mean, we may not want it this year, but next year maybe it's something we do every so many years as a board. But again, I can see whether it's 4,500 or 14,000, I can see that money better spent elsewhere.
All right, so at this point in time, I see the discussion lean towards moving away from having an audit. The motion on the floor, it talks about option one, the simplified method. I'm going to ask the mover if they want to withdraw the motion and have another motion come forward, because the seconder is speaking sort of against the motion that's on the floor. Yeah. So just to get a consensus out of here, and the one thing I like that we may move, I'll let the mover speak in a sec, is to withdraw the motion that's on the floor and then put a secondary motion that no audit's done at this time, but to have a revisitation, say every 2 years, so that the board can revisit that, so it doesn't, it just automatically comes here for some discussion and the board could determine something like that. Just an option, but I'll look to the mover to see what he would like to do at this present time.
Thank you, Chair, and I would be very happy to withdraw the motion and put forward a third option that we rely on the region's audit team to provide audit in their normal course of auditing various agency boards such as ourselves, and also as part of that request that the auditor come to one of our meetings just to provide us a high-level overview of what they find from an audited perspective. And the other part of that would be that we would visit this item in 2 years' time.
I'll look to the seconder if he's agreeable to second that. Okay. And just for procedural, we don't need a motion to withdraw the motion? Okay, you can withdraw. Okay, perfect, yeah. Just want to make sure I'm clear. So we have a new motion on the floor. It's a three-part motion that we discontinue the current practice of an audit, that we have the auditor come in and speak regarding our portion of the consolidated audit, and third, that this item should be revisited every 2 years by the board. So, Member Eek?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds like the revised motion is a two-part. The first part is that they come annually to give us an update on and I see dollars associated with that is not abiding by the objective, that it's just reviewed every second year. Maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe through the chief, through your finance staff?
So I don't think the auditors would do that because they wouldn't separate us from them, but we could bring you the report from the, we've never brought back the audit findings from the region, so we could bring you the entire, once the region has it presented to them, and the regional councils here will have seen it, we could bring it to this board, and it'll have all the management points in, and some of them will directly impact us. And and then we can bring it forward that way and have you see it through there. And if you have questions, then we can go further on there. Because there is also the option, which we were just talking about, of doing internal audits on specific items like purchasing cards or specific areas that we'd like to spend time doing or have the region do for us. So that if there is something that comes out of the management letter from the region that we'll bring to you, we could have someone come in and do special audits.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would concur with that, in listening to the presenter. Thank you.
Okay, so we're just going to amend the motion just to make sure that the service will report back on the audit findings of the region so that we have an understanding. And also at that time, I'll leave it sort of open-ended that if the finance staff feels that there's an area that we need audited specifically from the service point, which you mentioned a couple examples there, that you'll bring it at that point in time to a report. Okay. Deb, you have all that? Member Gibson, did you have your hand up? No. You're good? Okay. Okay. Any further questions? I think we came up with a good solution to that issue. Seeing no further comments, all those in favor of the recommendation as amended, those opposed, it's carried. So that moves us now to the item number 4, proposed amendments, financial reporting control and procurement of goods and services bylaw 375-2018. The recommendation is that the Niagara Regional Police Service Board financial reporting control and procurement of goods and services bylaw 375-2018 be repealed and replaced with a bylaw appending to the report, and further that the board chair be authorized to execute the required documentation. So if I could have a mover to put that, moved by Member Eek, second by Chair Ganzel. Any discussion on that? Member Gale.
Thank you, Chair. I have a bit of a problem with this, but my question through you to the chief or Lisa or whoever is, when was the last time this was revised? I'm sorry?
It would, through the chief.
I'm not sure if Deb Reed might be the best person to address that from a bylaw perspective.
Thank you. I believe it was reviewed in 2018,
But not changed?
Right, it was reviewed and there was some housekeeping and some amendments done.
I'm talking about the dollar amounts, Deb.
The dollar amounts, it's been, a long time. I don't recall.
Okay, thank you for that. So going to page 3, I have a problem with these dollar amounts because in the paragraph before it says level of risk tolerance, and this is nothing against you guys here. I trust you guys here, but I'm looking at future chiefs or chiefs of 20 years ago and things like this that I wouldn't have trusted as much, and I watch what I say, but within reason. But the dollar amounts I think are excessive on some of these. And example, the first tier, deputy chief, I think it should go 50,000 to 100,000. The chief of police, I think, should go from then 100,000 to 200,000, and then the board 200,000 and up. I think going up to 500,000 and allowing the chief of police, or even going as low as the deputy chief, and again, nothing against you guys, at $250,000 takes away our fiscal duties, our fiscal responsibilities here, that these things should be competitive purchase brought back to the higher levels as it goes along. And those are my recommendations for that one. My second one is on the next page, the direct negotiation methods. My question to you, Chief, through the chair is, does this handcuff you by changing this? Because you're going from chief of police from 50 to 100 to 50 to 150. This one doesn't bother me as much, but it's certainly, you have the right to go up to $149,999 without asking anyone from your position on this, according to the way it is. I just don't sit comfortable with that. And again, nothing against you, but I think that we have to have checks and balances more so on that than having a chief of police do that, unless there's a provision in there that it has to be brought back to the chair. You can do it, but it has to be brought back to the chair, has to be brought back to the board. Don't have a problem with it on that. So that was my question on that one. And any comments on the third page?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So in preparing this report, and I thank Laura for putting this together. She's reached out across police services, and I think what became evident is it's quite variable in terms of the threshold amounts that are provided to chiefs of police and deputy chiefs of police. Again, based on the risk tolerance level that the particular police services board has. With regards to the spending thresholds that are outlined on page 3, I think what separates that section from the table that's outlined on page 4 is this is a competitive bid process. We would have already gone to the board, sought approval to get an RFP to acquire a particular item.
I don't understand that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but just on that point. So a superintendent or director, according to this, is going up to 10 to 50, but still has to come to us first?
No.
Oh, I thought that's what you just said.
What I'm saying is that it would still be a competitive, this is for a competitive process. So whether it's through an RFP process, whether we're getting 3 bids, which is in accordance with the procurement bylaw.
But it won't come to the board at all.
If I could just interject it does come to the board because all these items are budgeted prior.
That's right.
And so there's, especially if it's a capital item, it'll be listed in the capital. You can't just pull something from the air. So it's already pre-planned in the budget, and then the chief is now working with that budget to move forward. He'll get a bunch of quotes on the competitive one, and then make a decision. So if it's, using the example, if it's 100,000, say it's 105,000, it would then have to come back to the board for the board approval. And that might take some timing, as opposed to if it's now his limit's up to the higher, he could just make that decision. But it's already been a competitive process. The board has already looked at it through the process of the budget, and there's other reports that come forward to it. So it's basically stopping another report from coming here for a minor amount. And the reason they look at these every so often is just the cost of items go up over time.
And I get that, yeah.
So that's why this report's here.
So the check and balance on this, to you, Chair, is all these would come to the board. It just allows them to do it.
That's correct.
But
I'll let.
Am I correct on that? If that's the way, that's our check and balance.
So through to the chair. So right now, the threshold is 100,000 for both competitive bid processes as well as direct negotiation. So within our budget, if we have an item approved, software licensing fees are very much items in our budget that are like 150,000. So at this point, when we're tendering that particular item and awarding it to a vendor, if it's greater than 100,000, we have to come to the board and have you approve that contract. So one of the things that in my review that was very evident is that there wasn't a prescribed amount that everyone was following, but there was very distinct that when it came to a competitive bid process, they allowed the services to have a much higher threshold before we had to come to the board. So for example, the recommendation is 500,000. So if we have a software licensing agreement for 150,000 that is competitively bid, or a capital item that's 450,000, but we've gone through a competitive bid process and gotten 3 or 4 or 5 different vendors bidding, those items would no longer come to the board.
Afterwards, would you report to us?
No, because we've had it approved. So in a for example, in a capital item where you would have approved the ARV for 450,000, You've approved that item, but we have to come back to the board today because when we tender that to a vendor, it's greater than 100,000. So we have to have you approve the purchase order or the award to that vendor. This, under the new recommended guidelines, you would approve that under the capital budget, but when we actually tender that, if we go through a competitive bid process, we would not be coming back to you to say, we have awarded this to vendor A. If we choose to directly negotiate that item, if it's greater than 150,000, then we will be coming back to you. Is
So
that clear, or?
It's clear, and therefore, after it's okayed that you go to the competitive process, Chair, then we could never hear of it again by way of that scenario. Is that correct? I thought that you had said that on a process like this of something that's $490,000, according to the suggested here, that the chief could put it to a competitive bid if we okayed it, and we never hear of it again.
With a higher threshold, that if items are in the higher threshold.
I have a problem with not the reporting, maybe not the authorization, but I have a problem that the reporting should be here, is that we have checks and balances to make sure everything is okay on this. I would like to see the tender shown to us. Whether we okay it or not, I have no problem with the starting and the procedure of it, but I want the reporting back to us to say, the chief has the right for $500,000, this ran for $400,000, and this is what we did. Thank you. Or we can question it there. And I have no problem with leaving the dollar amounts there if you do that, because that's our check and balance. But if we don't insist on a report back on every item like this, especially the ones from the chief, because the chief looks at the ones under you, am I correct in saying that? The deputy chief and the superintendents fall to the level above them to sign off on? Well, then we should be signing off on the chief to the 500,000, at least have it reported to us. That's our check and balance, I feel.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that for discussion.
Okay, yeah, we'll leave it at that point. There's other members, so we'll get a little bit more discussion. We'll go back to the chief. Member Gibson?
Yes, just along this line of discussion. Have we had problems in the past, mismanagement of the chief's money and the spending of it?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that when I said that. It's just that
No,
I
but-
trust this chief so much compared to other things. Wow. Did I word that right?
So my point is, if it's not broke, let's not try to fix it. If there hasn't been any issues with it, and it's all approved in capital budget, when the budget is approved to buy X amount of cars in a year, once we've approved it, the chief has exercised and the county has exercised their right and gone out and spent, $1 million or $500,000 on whatever. We've already approved it. Why do we have to have a report back? You have to trust that our accountants and the chief and the deputies are doing their job. And then it's caught in the annual audit anyways, the region is doing. It just seems to be creating, in my mind, more work for the staff. It seems to me the checks and balances are in place. There is no previous indication that we know of it being mishandled or mismanaged. And I think that we should leave the numbers the way they are. That's my opinion. Thank you.
I got Vice Chair Steele and then Member Eek.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I agree with what everybody says. Maybe if we at least get a quarterly report on these large items, that would come back as an information report, then if we have questions. At least it tells us we've done this in this quarter based on what our budget was, and this is what we've gone out, this is what we've tendered. It can be one report that comes back to us for information purposes. And again, any questions that come out of it, then we can ask them at that time. But if it's already gone through us and we've said, we're going to buy this item or this service, then yeah, up to these amounts, I have no issue. I mean, we do it municipally with our CAOs and some of our staff, so I have no issue with doing it here. And again, as things have gone up in price, obviously these numbers have to move up in line with everything. So I have no issue with it. But I'd like to, again, I'm like Bob, just to see a quarterly report, just to see how we've done.
I'll take Member Eek and then I'll let Chief McCulloch speak. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would concur with the two prior speakers that the board here is to provide oversight on behalf of the public for dollars being spent. And $500,000 without waiting for a confirmation at the year-end budget summary, I think we need a simplified method as by member or Vice Chair Steele, that a summary would ensure that we are doing our due diligence. The second point I'd like to make is we talk about competitive purchasing methods. What is a competitive bid? If we go out, for instance, as the ARV as the $450,000 item, there's very few people perhaps that could provide that. Is it 1, 2, 3 do bids? I mean, if we allowed $500,000 and there's competitive bid, only come back with one member or two members, what is the impact of that? We would not see that.
Through Mr. Chair, I'll have Laura address that.
So a competitive bid process, and we work with the region with any of those types of RFPs that go out. They are posted on a public site. And that is what makes that competitive. It makes it public. It's not like we're going out and selecting the vendors that we want to bid. And so it's very open, and then we have a committee and a set of criteria that we usually review and evaluate. But in speaking to the risk of what happens if we do go through a competitive bid process and perhaps we didn't write our specs appropriately and we get back only one vendor who's bidding on it, there's a clause in that I'm adding into the bylaw that says if we only get one bid, then it has to come back to the board if it's greater than $150,000. So the only time we would approve the chief would approve up to $500,000 is if we actually had more than one competitive bid on that publicly posted bid proposal.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Well, I was going to, Chief, did you have any other comments that you wanted to make? Because I know several members spoke and it looked, and then I'll go to Member Gale.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think Laura just has one other point of clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Through to the chair. In Schedule A, which is at the very back, I just wanted to make one minor little change that I noticed last night. It's the first page of Schedule A, the very back. It's page 19.
That's page 19?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a, on the third and the fourth box refers to formal quotation. I just want to have that amended to be request for quotation. So it's an actual RFQ as opposed to a formal quotation. It's just a minor change, but I noticed it late last night and I wanted to make sure that it's very clear to the staff that that requires us to do a public bid.
Through you, Chief, maybe through your finance staff, I know there's a quarterly variance report. Is that a mechanism that would pick up some of these items that Member Gale mentioned earlier? If it's 400,000, that information will be coming forward at that point in time? It's section 10.2 on page 12. Would that suffice to give Member Gale the information that he requires?
Through to the chair. So yes, we could add it as part of our variance report, but that we wouldn't be reporting on any capital items that met the thresholds. So we're open to it being a separate board report that's much more open and transparent to you. Just because the variance report can be we're usually just explaining budget to actual variance differences. So this is more on our procurement process. So I would think that it would make more sense to have a separate board report on it.
Member Gale?
So, fool with these words, I'd like to add an amendment to it. I think it's friendly. On the second point, that the board chair be authorized to execute the required documentation and a quarterly report for every purchase over 50, competitive bid for over $50,000, whatever words you want to go with, Deb, is provided to us. And again, I'm free with those words. You know what my intentions are here.
So $50,000.
I figure that's a deputy chief level.
Okay, but so for informal quotations, we go up to 50,000, so would it be, we don't do a formal quotation, we can get 3 quotes from suppliers, so you're gonna get a lot of
I'm
items
not
on
asking
there.
for all the quotes, I'm asking where you ended up at. I'm not asking for how the tender went or anything, but what you bought.
So I'm not sure if we'd be able to capture all this, because a $50,000 quote is, we get 3 competitive, so we ask for 3 quotes, and then we choose one of the 3 quotes based on the best information, so that's a low threshold for reporting back.
Yeah, I remember, it's actually going backwards in the sense.
It is?
Yeah, because right now, it's 100,000.
Right now, the deputy chief is, you're
Oh.
suggesting 50 to
Oh, I-
250.
Okay. No, I was looking at the chief's component of it.
So I was thinking, our employees are the deputy chief and the chief, so I thought that would be the one, just as an information, the tenders that were agreed upon, or the competitive bids that were agreed upon, as an information report every quarter.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, we're not getting that now, so it's actually,
That's just the tenders that have been accepted.
okay,
Yeah, I don't want the process, I just want what was bought.
okay. So if I'm understanding what the members asked for, so anything that's going to be expended over 50,000, he would want a list of those items. Is that what I'm hearing? Yes, and it should be that long. Okay, then I'm going to ask staff on that.
So I just have to say, for efficiency purposes, you're better off leaving it the way it is then, because I'm just looking at my staff back here, and we're having trouble trying to figure out how we're even gonna pull that information, how much time it's gonna be to pull that information, because the finance staff doesn't actually see every single document that goes through. It's done through the system. It goes through, the region has a very sophisticated system that you put in. They put in our purchases, it goes through, gets approved automatically with information in there, with the documents all in there. We don't see every transaction that goes through as a service. It goes to the region. They actually flag items if they notice something and let us know if there's something's going through, and they'll ask us questions on it. So pulling this information, it's not like the old days where we see every invoice coming through. When I first got here, we saw every invoice that came through finance, and we would go through someone would be looking at every invoice. Now the system is very sophisticated. It goes through all the documentations in the system.
So Chair, I get what she's saying.
It's easier to do it
How do you make
this
it
way.
simple, Lisa? You know what I'm looking for, what dollar amount are you suggesting?
I would say 250,000, but that may be high, or 100,000, leave it as it is. It might be just easier just to leave it as is, but that's, doing a separate report on 50,000 is probably more time consuming.
Okay, so 100,000 would work? I'm trying to cut it short here.
Well, just through you, Mr. Chair, I guess the point of this was to try and simplify things, to reduce the number of reports that were coming through to the board.
But doesn't it do that, Chief, by allowing you to do your competitive bid? We just want a report saying who won what.
But
It's adding more work to the staff, adding more work to it.
Okay.
Yeah, the way it is fine in my mind. The look here is in regards to mismanagement of money or money being spent where we don't know. I trust the audit, at the annual audit that is done, would catch those sorts of things. Again, as I said before, we're micromanaging is what we're asking to do here by receiving reports on every little expense. There's lots of money spent, and I don't think we need to see every little report. The audit will catch it if there's mistakes, and it runs through capital. We look at it, we approve it, and so I don't think we need to do a thing here. I don't think we need to create more work for staff. You can watch them, and they're sitting there trying to figure it out. Obviously, it's a much more of a challenge for them, and it's more work on top of what they're already doing. As the chief said, looking to simplify reporting, still covering all the bases, still making sure that everything is being done properly. The money is being spent as it is allotted to be spent. But to create more reporting, it's unnecessary, it creates more work. I'm in favor of leaving everything just exactly the way it is.
Just remind me, the motion on the floor is to accept the new threshold limits. That's what we're discussing. It was moved by Member Eek, seconded by Chair Gansel. So that's, if there's an amendment to that motion, let me know, and we can add it. But right now, that's what we're discussing is increasing the limits to what's been suggested here. Member Eek.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think what the concern expressed by Member Gale is the oversight to items. And if I understand correctly, the process that we have is that if we give the threshold up to the 500,000 limit, then we may not see relevance to that spending. It could be an item that was budgeted for $500,000 and it may come in and accept it and it went for 650,000 or whatever. No, I guess that's wrong. You're at a limit, but it could be something that was 300,000 that could come in at 450, and I think that would question something around this table, where it would go through and you might not see it until the budgetary summary at year end, if I'm understanding the checks and balances. So I think the question is, if we can't see that item to item of a major purchase, then we're lacking the oversight. But
It's not, just to be clear, it's not lacking in oversight, but just, I guess, listening to staff here, they've suggested to increase the thresholds. They said if the board is not comfortable with increasing those thresholds, they would rather stay at the current thresholds than look at creating a new report with new mechanisms. So instead of adding more work to staff, either if we're not going to simplify it, keep it the way it is. So unless there's any further discussion on that, I'm going to call the question on the increase one. If you don't support that, then we can look at something else. Okay, Chair Gansel.
Yeah. Just before you call the question on that, I don't have an issue with that.
Yeah.
Just for a clarity perspective, item 11.1.10, which is on page number 13. Just check the wording on that. It's a bit convoluted. I know you've blacked out some material, but I'm not exactly clear on the word disposal, and then it says that provides advice services. Are we disposing of advice and services? I just look at the wording on that. It's not, it doesn't flow well, that's all.
Yes.
So I'll be voting against this because if there's a chance of something that we approve for $200,000 and it comes in at $450,000 and we can't find out about it, I can't accept this. Thank you.
Just, through the chief.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Having listened to this discussion in its entirety, I wonder if there's another option that respects the concerns identified by Member Gale, but also allows the chief a bit more authority, and it's referencing the numbers that Member Gale initially identified. If the $500,000 is an issue or a concern, Member Gale suggested amending that to 200,000 and amending the deputies to 100,000. So in some respects, that would be a bit of a compromise, but would still allow Member Gale the comfort of knowing there's that authority, but still increases the authority for Deputy Flynn, myself, and the chief, and still gives the board the governance or oversight of the 250 to 500 window.
Okay.
And that's all. Thank you.
I thank you for the suggestion. I'm going to look to the mover and the seconder, which were Member Eek and Chair Gansel. If you want to change the rating from down to the 250,000. So anything above the 250,000 then would be reported back to the board. Anything below that. So it's giving the chief a little bit more room, so he's streamlining a little bit more efficiently, but yet it still maintains the oversight at a smaller amount for the board. Is that something the member would be agreeable to? Okay.
Yeah, I would be agreeable to that. The recommendation, I think I heard 100,000 to 200,000, is that correct?
That was the numbers that Member Gale initially stated, and then.
To confirm what I said the deputy chief 50 to 100, and the chief of police then 100 to 200.
Correct.
And
That's what
above
you
that to
initially
the
said.
board. That's what I said. Now, I'm willing to dicker around with that a little bit, but not to 500,000, but if that's it.
Okay, so for simplicity, I was gonna say is just, on page 3 of the report, where it talks about 250, 50, and 10 is having those as the upset limit instead of the bottom set limit, if Member Gale is agreeable to that. Yep, all right. Yeah, I just, okay, Member Gibson, and then I'll have,
So just to clarify, okay, I fully accept reducing the numbers, but what about the reporting process? Because that's a burden of work upon the staff that, you know, are we still looking at reporting as it happens, quarterly? How's that, what are we looking at there? What were your thoughts there, Member Gill?
That eliminates.
Does that totally eliminate?
That
just the-
eliminates that. We go the same system we had before. We'll see that in the budget that you sent out.
so just for clarity, the only reporting would be if it's above 250,000.
Right, that's acceptable. And then to Member Gale's point too, if it was over that and spent and we hadn't authorized it, is it, just for my own knowledge, the authority for spending goes up to X amount, anything over that, he would have to come back to the board anyways. So that's not a concern to me that we have to worry about that. So, thank you.
Through you, Chief, anyone on the finance staff want to make a final comment here?
I just want to clarify to Member Gale, I think your concern was that a budgeted item of 200,000, that the chief would then have the authority to approve up to the 500,000. This is more on the procurement side. So this is a budgeted item that is 250,000, and this is just the awarding to a vendor. If it's competitively awarded, that's what this language is basically saying. If we go through a competitive process, we publicly put it there, and we're not selecting one vendor, the chief will have up to 500,000 of budgeted items to award to the vendor through that process. That addresses your concerns that we would be, it doesn't speak to if the item is greater than the budget amount. This is all within the budget. To protect, again, I want to repeat, to protect the board, that if we weren't going through a competitive process and we ended up with just one bidder, that threshold comes right back down to 150,000, and then we have to come to you. So that high-level threshold is only in the awarding to a vendor that contract.
May I respond to her?
Yeah.
Thank you. So my concern, though, and Member Eek said the same thing, is if we think something's going for $200,000 on a tender and it comes in at 450, and we don't find out about it, and that concerns us. And I'm sure we would find out eventually, at least I hope so, and I don't like I hope so. So, thank you.
Okay. So just, yes.
Are we still reporting back? Because my only, like, if we change it, are we still reporting back? Because my only concern with reporting back is that it's too late to do anything anyways.
No, what we're doing is, all we're doing is changing the thresholds, and as indicated on page 3, the threshold height would be the 250, 50, and $10,000. And we keep the board at 100. And the other one is that the board will be remaining at $100,000. Okay, Member Chair Genzel?
Just for clarity, Ven, I'm dealing on page 3.
Yep.
Can you just clarify what the top levels are for the new amounts for all 4 positions?
Okay, just so everyone has it, the board will stay at 100,000. The chief would run up to 250,000 would be the top end. The deputy chief would be 50,000, and the superintendent would be 10,000.
Can I just clarify? I think the board would change to 250.
Okay. 250, okay. Yeah, we'll keep it consistent. Well, there'd be no change, I guess. Yeah, sorry, just for clarity, it's 250,000 for the board, 250,000 for the chief. It will be 50,000 for the deputy and 25,000 for the superintendent directors, which is what's right there right now.
Sorry, I thought it was up to 100,000 for the deputies.
Oh, okay, all right,
And then the supers,
would be 50, right?
Right.
Okay, all right. So it's 250, 250, 100, and 50, just to be clear.
250, yes.
All right. So the mover and seconder have agreed to the amended motion as presented. I think we've discussed this to death, and we've had a lot of good finance comments. Thank you, Chief, for your staff. So at this point in time, I'm going to call the question on the amended motion. All those in favor? Those opposed? And it's carried unanimously. So that now moves us to item number 5. This is the NRPS Mobile Command Post Alternative Funding Opportunities. There is a recommendation that the board not pursue alternative funding opportunities for police capital purchases, specifically sponsorships and advertising incentives. If I can have a mover and a seconder to put this on the floor for discussion. Moved by Chair Ganzel, seconded by Member Gibson. Discussion on this. Member Gill.
You expected me to
Yes.
talk on this.
So I have you as number 1.
Yeah, so thank you. Certainly, I'm against this, for lack of better words. And I'll start off. A few months ago, the chief stated that the mobile command unit is needed in 2000 or 2021, but must be by 2021. And the vote by our board was 5-2 in favor of it. And I have a problem with accepting with the way our finances are, and we always need something as a police service. And we've just okayed an armored vehicle. Matter of fact, it's probably in stock now. I have a problem with allowing a purchase for something that the chief said that as long as he has it by 2021. And in conversation with the chief, and I agree with him, if he doesn't get it this year, we damn well better make sure we get it next year in 2021. So I mean 2000. If we don't get it in 2000, we should get it in 2021. But on an item that's 400 or 450K, was it 450? 450? Okay, $450,000 when it's not necessary right now. And we know we can invent any case that all of a sudden you might need it, or you might not need it for 2 years, whatever the case may be. We have a unit now that's towed, and the chief explained that all to us. But for this board to okay the purchase of that is one thing. And then I'm looking at other funding. We go to Calgary, and I see that Moncton, and I'm talking to people out there, that Moncton sponsored, had a sponsor for their unit, and we've got an anonymous sponsor for the armored vehicle. And I'm wondering, apples to apples on this stuff. And could allowing controlled sponsorship not possibly provide our service with needed capital items in the future? I would think that the rank and file should be supportive of this type of sponsorship if it's controlled. And I say if it's controlled. I'm not talking about, I'm not going to say any companies here, but pop companies or potato chip companies on their shirts. That's ridiculous. But I'm talking about capital like we're in right now. Something like this that the chief and the board can control on this. And I'll go one step further. You might allow a bank or some type of company that's been around for a while to do something, but say a marijuana company, even though it's legal now, you might look at it strange right now with the way it is to sponsor things. I get that. That's where we could control something. Now, many government buildings are sponsored for arenas, to museums, to major government festivals and events, even road names in different communities, in St. Catharines, for an example. Now, we know in the NHL, they never allowed rinks boards for sponsorship, but now you got the NHL, NASCAR, major soccer that have logos everywhere on that. They recognize the revenue source. And we're not the same as them, but they control the message according to their bylaws, what you can have on there, on what they have. So I Googled police in Canada for sponsorships. And I went to the 2019 RCMP Charity Ball in Regina, where it's right on the site. Now, this is a charity ball, but this is the RCMP, big names, and it's a major nutrition retailer, their logo, two benefit plan companies, 2 major contractors, 2 large car manufacturers, 2 insurance companies, even a day spa, and I can go on and on with this. I have the pictures of it on their RCMP charity ball. What's the difference here? Are these people looking for favors? Probably not. They're doing it because they're good corporate citizens on this. At least I hope that's the way it is. Then I went to the 2009, just by Googling, 2009 Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police Conference. And there was a scandal as a result of this, where a gun manufacturer and a mobile phone company sponsored the conference for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it got into the scandal about how Celine Dion tickets were bought for chiefs of police and that going to it. Not you, Chief, and nobody in this room. But this is the Chief of Police for Canada, the Canada Chief of Police Association, that advises the government. Matter of fact, they advised the government. They were our last group to advise the government on marijuana and things like this, yet this was on there that they were getting sponsorships for stuff like this. Apples to apples, not quite, but still, why did they need that type of stuff? Why would they be allowed or even need this type of thing to defray their costs? Chiefs that advise the government. Now, there are too few people left who do not derive their income from the tax dollar, and many elected and appointed people keep hitting them for more tax levy without exploring alternative funding options. How would minor hockey and minor baseball and other sports like that get along without sponsorships? They need that type of avenue, as long as it's controlled and they control the message on this stuff. Now, I'm not sure if anyone would donate. I made an example before that I walked into a bank and when this came up a couple months ago, and I brought it up, and they said, you know, we might be willing to kick into something like that. But as long as it's for a capital item and the PSB controls it in the ask and with the input from the chief, and I don't mean they provide a staff person for this, but like some forces have foundations, we don't on these type of things. Maybe that's an avenue to go. But we should allow sponsorships and challenge the bylaws to be more modern. I suggest that maybe you want to refer something like this back to staff to seek alternative funding solutions or keep it as a board level. Don't waste their time on it, but us to look at it, to look for more funding solutions, which could include a controlled sponsorship. What does it hurt if some reputable firm or citizen wishes to have their name put on a building, a room, a mobile command unit in this thing, whatever, if it's controlled by the chief and the PSB? It's all in the character of the chief and the character of the board who is allowed for this type of stuff. But I think we have to get more modern in the world. And Deb's going to correct me if this bylaw is controlled by us. If it's a Ontario provincial rule that you can't do this, dead in the water. But if it's something with us, we should consider this, because if all of a sudden John Doe Bank said, and I keep using banks, but they're the ones with the big money, came and said, we'd like to sponsor this room right here for thousands of dollars, we should consider it. I'm not saying we do it. We should consider it on this type of thing. So a mobile command unit, certainly you don't want big names on the side of it. But for us to say no on something like this, I think we have to get in the real world, because we can't afford this stuff. We can't afford all the things we're doing, and it might open up a revenue stream where some groups, an example, if something happened in downtown Niagara Falls around hotels, I think the hotels would all get together and say, hey, we'd like to sponsor you on something like this. We have to say no. According to this, we have to say no. So I'm against this report. I don't want to say no to it, but I would hope that somebody would refer this back rather than killing it and saying, let's meet as a board and discuss a future of this, be it a foundation, be it whatever, but let's get into the 2000s or 2020s. Thank you.
I'll go to Member Gibson, and I'll let the chief.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Member Gale's points are all extremely valid, and we certainly do have to look at new ways of doing business and soliciting money. Community policing has always been about the community. I think the real question here, to me, is do we want our command post vehicle to have advertising on it? Bottom line, to me. I don't have a problem if, you know, another business comes in and sponsors it, much like our armored vehicle, but I would certainly question advertising on the side of it. So that's really, to me, the question. Do we want that? Personally, I'm not in favor of that, but if somebody came forward and wanted to supply some funding towards the procurement of that vehicle, that I would not have a problem with. I don't know if that situation exists. I'm sure it does. It did with the armored vehicle. It's different circumstances, but that's my thought on that. So I personally would not be in favor of advertising on the side of the vehicle. Thank you.
Chief, any comments? And then I'll go to Member Eek.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think just to highlight some of the points in the report, with regards to the solicitation of donations. So I think what we're recommending is that we should not be soliciting for donations, and that if there are donations, it's fine for the board to consider accepting a donation. And again, that each one, I think, will have to be weighed on its own merits as to who the individual is that's potentially providing that donation. But I think the current bylaw is very clear. Section 9.4.3, there must be no general solicitation to the public at large, and that the solicitation must not involve an operational program. I believe currently the way the legislation reads with regards to the responsibility, it is the responsibility of the board to provide adequate and effective policing. So anything that is considered an operational program within the context of providing adequate and effective policing, there may be some concerns around that. And again, you may want to involve, because it is a board bylaw, you may want to involve your board counsel to provide some input on that. And that, excuse me, that the solicitation must not compromise or appear to compromise the integrity or impartiality of the service. And I think that's the real concern that we have with regards to the potential of having advertisement on vehicles and or other buildings or equipment that we may have. So those are my points at this point in time.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, it is highlighted on page 2 regarding that the service may accept donations, but there is restrictions with those donations. So there's policies in place for that to meet the items that you mentioned. Member Eek and then Member Gibson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I believe there is an opportunity here, as mentioned, but I concur with the chief when he indicates that the solicitation might reflect, I'll use the Donald Trump thing, quid pro quo, I guess is what we're looking at. What if I give you something, I want something in return? And that's really the no-no of the situation, that we do not want to be seen as impartially abiding by our laws. So I think the control aspect of accepting donations would be the control on how we wish. The term advertising, I think, for me is not acceptable. I don't want to use it. But the acknowledgement in a small manner that would satisfy, I think, Member Gale, that if that was a choice to just say it was GM of Canada in the small, it might be, but that control could be left to this board, and I think with the concurrence of the chief, that it would be acceptable to the community. So those are my comments. I'll let others comment.
Member Gibson.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Just along the chief's line there as well. Absolutely no solicitation should be done. If somebody came forward and offered some funding towards it, that is one thing. The advertising aspect of it, to me, is you know, the RBC decal on the side of it. Next thing you know, we have a high-risk situation at an RBC bank, and the team is there, and parked outside is our vehicle, all the police around it, and there's the RBC sticker on it, and we're in, you know, it's a high-risk situation in an RBC bank. We may not see anything from that, but the global mail test on that could be significant, and the media pick that up and make all sorts of stories out of that. So I'm 100% against any advertising on the vehicle, but I would entertain, you know, if somebody, business company came forward and offered, you know, X amount of money towards it with nothing in return for them, that to me would make sense. Thank you.
Member Gill?
Sorry for a second time. No one's going to come through and offer any money to us. I won't say no one. If someone lost a loved one, they'd probably donate the world to us on something. But as far as a business out there, unless they get some advertising on it, let alone the solicitation, I don't see a problem. And correct me if I'm wrong, Chief or Chair. Is there not a foundation, or there, I know the RCMP has a foundation. I found that going through here, and other ones. Is there room for us to have a foundation for, and is it a wise choice, for getting capital items? Like a lot of charities around here, the hospitals and that have their foundation for capital items. Because as far as that, and I'll go on, the solicitation, if you don't put out there, like the GNGH or the NHS does, they have a list of things, and anything from $1 million down. And I remember looking at it and saying, I'll buy all these things to help out the GNGH, and I bought a bunch of things, I won't go into it. But because they put that out there, they didn't put my name, oh yeah, I'm sorry, they did, but it was wheelchairs, and they had my name on the back of them. Matter of fact, I broke my leg at that time, and they said there wasn't a wheelchair, and then they found one with my name on it and gave it to me, but that's a different story. I'm wondering what's wrong with solicitation when we say we need this as a police service and we're looking for the public to help us out? What's wrong with that? It's not like we're going door to door, but I don't see the problem in this, because money doesn't grow on trees. As a board, if we don't do something like this, we're not finding alternative ways to find it. And I go back to the baseball teams and the hockey teams and everybody else. They call people for donations. We're not going to call. But if we had something out there with a list, please help us as a region, as a whatever for things. I think these are things that this report should be referred back, and we should discuss it rather than kill it. Because these are major items that somebody might donate us hundreds of thousands of dollars if you put a logo like an RBC. I'm sorry, I disagree with you. But an RBC logo, a little one, within reason, or that was the example you used, but anybody's logo, things happen. If something happened at the RBC, then sorry, it's there. But it might be in front of a Bank of Montreal, or it might be something else. Regardless, we're not putting, it has to be okayed by the chief. I disagree with this, because the taxpayer out there is getting hit too much. We're hitting our levy too much with the people, and money doesn't grow on trees, and that's what I look at this. It's still classy the way we would do it. So I would hope that this could be referred back for another discussion rather than voted down, because I think it would allow us to even consider a foundation like the RCMP has, or somebody for equipment that we need. Thank you.
No, Member Vice Chair Steele.
Thank you. I do have an issue with it. I mean, I agree with it. You know, you don't want Tim Hortons on the side of any police service vehicle or anything like that. But if I can make an amendment to this, is that we accept as number one the recommendation with the words after incentives at this time. Add number two, that we have our board staff report back in 6 months with regards to pursuing what other police associations across, not just Ontario, but across Canada, including the RCMP, are doing. And included in that would be the foundation, and how those things work, and if they are receiving money, how those monies are used. And I know what Member Gale is talking about. I mean, the unfortunate part about the majority of issues that he's talking about, whether it be baseball, hockey, football, basketball, those are all paid for by parents and fundraising. It's not tax dollars unless they're going out for grants. With regards to events that, you know, we run, I know the chief runs an event which is to raise money, and there are sponsorships there, but it's not out on the street. Those are non-budgeted events that aren't paid for by the taxpayer. So there is, to me, a big difference. But I think if we ask staff to go out, report back to us in 6 months, saying, look, we found X amount of police forces, including the RCMP across the across Canada. These are things they've done to help supplement their budgets, to help pay for capital projects. These are the outcomes, none of them accept advertising on any vehicles, but they have seen success at it. I have no issue with looking at it, but to move this forward, I think at this time, I wouldn't support going out until we actually see, really what our rules are, because there are some rules that may have to be changed within our bylaw, make sure that we're okay with the Police Services Act and any other act in Ontario. But at least it gives us time to look at this, come back, discuss it middle of next year, and, if we feel that that's the way to go, then I have no issue with that. So I'll throw that on the table as a 1 and a 2, and then here for discussion.
And should we, Mayor Steele, should we look at that, all advertising everywhere, like charity balls on all that? Or should we look at it specific to response units, i.e. what we're looking at for our vehicle? Should we narrow it down that that's what we examine? Excuse me, or should we look at just, anything, charity balls, the whole thing? Because I think it would be much more applicable if we looked at, command post vehicles across Canada as opposed to a whole bunch of things.
I think it would be relevant to what we're discussing, which would be operational equipment, not as the Vice Chair mentioned, if it's a ball that's outside, it's fundraising for itself, it usually gives to another sort of charity. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, because with the Chief's annual ball, I mean, that has nothing to do with us here as a budgeted item. So that's not taxpayers' dollars. That's a ticket-funded event, plus there's prize sponsorships and things like that go to it. So, but again, it's raising money for a purpose through the community, but that has nothing to do with our day-to-day operations here.
Correct, and I would just add that any funds that are raised through the gala go to a registered charity, so it's not going through to, flowing through into the police budget.
So I'm talking about what Bob brought up as far as, basically it's usually a big ticket item. That's what makes headlines. We're buying a new command post, we're doing this, we're doing that. So I want to know what's going on across Canada. I mean, I know Bob's looked up some of it, but have a report from our staff come back to our board in 6 months, and then we could actually have a fulfilling discussion on this. Because if there's ways to do it, without it, to me, looking wrong, I can't see just a big banner, and I know what he's saying, but whether it's a little sticker or a big banner on the side of a equipment or building, I think we have to separate these things. Like, we're not a hockey rink, we're not a baseball field, we're not Tim Hortons football field in Hamilton. But if there's opportunities, I have no issue with looking at that.
And that's exactly what's my point, was that we should simply focus in on vehicles or command posts as opposed to charities, all the other galas, that sort of thing. That was my only point there. I agree totally with everything you've said.
It will be capital purchases. Chair Kenzel?
I mean, I can concur with what I'm hearing. The various RCMP groups that were mentioned earlier and the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, I'll use the CACP example. That's not being funded by taxpayers' dollars. Their operation, similar to the Ontario Association, is strictly through dues and sponsorship. So they're in the right sort of venue for that. I've always been very reluctant to see any what I call localization of vehicles. However, I'm not totally opposed for us to at least pursue the review of the ability to see what opportunities there are. I'm talking about the foundation approach. And I think that's something we can do in the next 6 months. So those are just my comments on the item.
Yeah, well, okay. What I've been hearing then is, can you move this in a second by our member, or Chair Ganzel and member Gibson, you were the mover and the seconder. If we could maybe reword it to capture the intent of Vice Chair Steele, Deb will clean up the wording, but basically the board continue its current practice as outlined in the bylaws, and within 6 months, a report come back looking at current practices of the police board services regarding capital purchases and foundations, that will come back. So we're continuing status quo, and then we're going to have some further information come back within the 6 month, and the board will work with the service to come back with some. Okay. So that's the new motion that's on the floor. It's part 1 and 2. Any further discussion on that, Chief? Did you want to make a final comment?
I just wonder if there should be some reference to that, that whatever is, any amendments that are proposed, that they're in accordance with the Police Services Act of Ontario as well, just that there may be some foundations that are out in Western Canada, as an example, that don't necessarily have the same legislative requirements that we have here in Ontario. That's all.
I think I would anticipate that coming back with the board report, if there's been anything that's been outlined in Canada, that the restrictions that that are imposed on it would be part of the information coming back. But thank you for that point. Yes. Yeah.
Chief, when I did my Googling that, I couldn't find anybody in Ontario getting sponsorships, but I found it everywhere else. Everywhere else, it seems, Moncton and other places. Is there a Police Act thing that you can't get sponsorships in Ontario that you know of? Because that's something that then the government should be challenged in Toronto on stuff. Because even the building here, even though it's owned by the region, maybe it's a moot point because it's owned by the region, but regardless.
Yeah, if the chief doesn't have an answer, I don't expect you to have one here.
Okay,
but
okay, I thought you knew it. Okay.
Well, I had our in-house counsel, Ms. Wanda Shreve, do some research based on the legislation and based on the board's current bylaw. She can, I believe, clarify that answer for you.
Okay.
So through you, Mr. Chair, Section 4, Sub 3 of the Police Services Act specifically states that municipalities are required to provide all infrastructure and administration necessary for adequate and effective policing. So with that, combined with the adequacy standard on the major command posts, as well as the board's own bylaw, that informed our recommendation.
So it just, that'll come back with the report, so outlining it, but thanks for that information. It gives us a little bit more clarity. Okay. Based on that discussion, we have an amended motion that's been presented. So all those in favor, those opposed, and it's carried unanimously. That moves us to other business. Is there any, Vice Chair Steele?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just through you to staff, and I'm going to go back to our discussion under item 3. Quite frankly, I really want to see you guys come forward with more alternatives to us, and I've brought this up before in a couple of other items in the past. If there's alternative ways for us to save money, and one was not going through these audits that, quite frankly, are already done at the region, I really want to see that in your report. When and I'll take my police services hat off, put Mayor Steele's hat on, and when I challenged my staff and council to think outside the box when I was elected in my inauguration speech, I really meant it. And staff in Port Colborne have really taken a hold of that, and they're really coming forward to our council with all kinds of alternatives that, quite frankly, they never did before. I don't know why, but maybe they just felt that it's going to be, the answer is no. I think they have a very good comfort level at our council, and I would hope that you guys have a good comfort level with this board. And I think this board has shown its respect for you as well as your respect for us. But I really want to see this stuff coming forward more and more. I just, you know, to give us a report that really we don't really have to do, and it does save us money, I'd like to see that as an alternative. You know, the board has done this in the past, but your rules state that you don't have to do this. We can actually put this money to better use somewhere else. We can look at the Deloitte, in this case, the Deloitte Touche, report that the region does that we're included in, and bring back that report for you. It frees up time for us, which actually saves us money, to be quite frankly, in the long run, because we're not spending time on things that we don't really need to be doing. And we can get the end result through our own staff anyways, with regards to what the Deloitte, in this case, the Deloitte or the Deloitte comes forward with. So as one board member, I'd really like to see that, and hopefully the chief that can take that to his staff, so that, you know, I just sometimes feel that you guys go to a level, but I don't know, I don't want to say you're afraid to say things, but I kind of get that as a member here, that, you know, maybe it was that way in the past, but, you know, going back how many years, but I don't want to micromanage. We're here as a police services board to look after the interests of the public and the taxpayers' dollar and everything else, but we are here to run an efficient and effective police force. What I've seen here in my year now is that is there. But I really want to see it. I want to pull more out of you. I just think you guys can spend your time better doing things than a lot of the stuff. And I don't mean a lot, I shouldn't say a lot, but the number of things that I see that there's got to be alternatives and better alternatives given to us. So I don't know if you want to comment on that, Chief, or.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I have no problem presenting additional alternatives. That's not a concern or a problem at all. I think what it's a balancing act, as well as trying to be respectful of past decisions of boards and past practices of the board, and what has been expected of us to present as far as information to the board, and complying with what has been requested of us in the past. And again, I think there's that mutual respect that has to be adhered to, that if the board is looking for something else or something different, we're not opposed to doing business differently. So I think, as I've mentioned before, I think collaboration is really key for all of us going forward, so that we can provide the best possible service.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, through you. Totally agree. I just don't want to always see it coming from us, because there are times when we've done it today. We've had some great discussion around this table, made some changes here with the items coming forward, but I really want to pull it out of staff, that if they have an idea, you know, with whatever's coming forward, they take it through you and say, hey, I really want to present this because I feel it's better for this organization. To be quite frank, I don't want to see it stop at your door all the time. I want to see it coming forward. So, obviously, if it makes sense, but I believe it will make sense. I just want to think, or I do think that, you know, we can be more efficient, and we can move things along quicker. And it's not a whole myriad of things, but it's a lot of little tiny things that all of a sudden they add up at the end of a year. You know, and I do this with our staff in Port Colborne. One thing I was always frustrated as a city councilor was that we'd get our city budget, and then there'd be a lot of items that for next year our staff would complain about because senior staff didn't bring it forward. So what we've done as a council is we've put that out there, is that we want to see that list of things that the senior staff didn't want to bring forward. So if we want to pull something out of it, and whether it's a senior staff or the people that work under them, when we ask them questions when they present the budget, no different than you do with us at regional council, that stuff can be discussed, because some councilors may think that whatever the senior staff wants to bring forward isn't important right now, but there may be some smaller items that can be brought forward to fit in within our budget that we can do. So to me, it's like that with everyday course of our business here. So I personally, I just really want to see that. I just want to see us be more efficient, and for us as a board to have more options at times. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Chief, I do want to commend your finance staff, specifically in that report there. I did have discussions with your finance staff regarding the potential options. And when I did discuss, I said, bring the options forward, let the board make a decision. So when there's no right answer. So when there's 2 or 3 options, and the board has some fulsome discussion. So I do want to give credit to you and your staff for doing that. And as a board chair, I appreciate that. It leads to some more livelier discussion, and you ultimately come up with a better decision. So again, it goes back to the cooperation between the board and the service. I think it's working well, and I think we could continuously improve it by just having further discussions. Thank you. Is there any other business? Since there's no other business, our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday. Next Finance Committee meeting is scheduled Thursday, January 9th, 2020 at 9:30 a.m. here at the Police Service Headquarters, Community Room number 1. So at this point in time, we're going to take a 2-minute recess, and following the recess, we'll be entering into a Public Information Technology Committee meeting, which will take place in a couple minutes. Thank you.